let's talk about the stitch frames. Those are cool. So stitch frames, as I mentioned on the blog, with the stitch frames, there's nothing new to dies that have a stitch edge, but what I wanted is something that had more of a little hand stitching look than something perfectly symmetrical. So these shapes, these have scaled, look at that, see I told you I'm gonna mess up our whole space. These have scaled pieces, and when I say that, I refer to them as scaled versus nesting, because although they start graduating down in size, once I get to the smaller two pieces, I didn't like the proportion of that. I didn't like how stretched it was. So I just wanted to keep kind of the proportion of that. So it's not a true nested die, that's why they're not called that, but they are scaled because when you start getting into the size, I wanted all those pieces to be workable. I wanted to use them all. Now, they also each come with the border. So I have them in rectangle and oval. So the rectangle one has these edges, and I'll show you that the oval ones have these scalloped edges. Let me show you what they do. What's cool about these guys is that they have that great little stitching feature, and they have this blade on the outer edge. So there's only a cut line on the outer edge, which means I can take a piece of paper. Now, because I'm going to a thin die with an open space, I really don't want to work with precision. You can, but you need to be really careful. If you have a die that doesn't have any connection and you try to use this pad, it will totally curl. Forget just slightly bending it. It will almost look like a banana, okay? Because it has no cross beams to hold on to it, and this is providing too much pressure. So 9 out of 10 times, you don't need to use that precision. So I always say, if you're using a framelit or something open, just go back to your good old standby, okay? What we normally use for thin dies, because if you don't have any cross support, you'll risk just turning your die into just a horrible, horrible shape. So this, got my 2 cutting pads. You kind of have to go back to normal. Put this down, we run this through. All right. That's probably why she did it. This machine, I think, is tired. I do.
She worked it.
I think it's super tired. I'll shim this one too. That's crazy to shim a rectangle. All right. So what we get is, we get a frame that is cut out. We have this great little stitching accent that's kind of funky zigzag, funky straight stitch, nothing symmetrical, but but what's really cool about this is that most of the stitch dies just kind of deboss a pattern. This is an actual cut blade, so this cuts through. And I did that because, again, I think a lot of people that want to do stitching on a project can just pick up a needle and thread and literally stitch through this, because all of these are cut holes, so you don't have to pierce it. If you're going to use multiple stacks, if you want to use layers, you can take any of these frames. You can scale the next size down. Remember, my cut line is on the outside edge. So right away I can see that I'm going to have that wide of a frame. I can make any size frame I want with this. Or I can say, you know what? I want to just create a window down here because I want to stamp something up there. So you don't always have to nest them in frames. You can cut these out however you want. So you can use them. Yeah, you have to kind of think way outside the box, because people go, oh, you can only nest these frames. Yeah, do whatever you want. Okay, let's run this through. Back we go. All right, so this is going to create our cut edge, so that's it, but then we're gonna get that piece, come on. And this piece is going to allow us to either layer this on the top or use it for something else. But I love that little cut that we get all throughout that whole project. Now we'll talk about these guys. These guys have a cut down the center, so nothing on the outside, which means I can take a card and maybe I want to create kind of something a little funky. No surprise there. So I'm going to take this and angle this on my card. I'm going to do that. You can go straight across the bottom, but that's predictable. So this one is going to cut right down the center, so what it's going to do is cut my paper but give me a stitched edge on both sides. Okay? So it will allow me to layer and put a piece of cardstock in there, a piece of ribbon in there, anything I want, or layer and mix and match those. So you can use the straight edge to even make your own frames if you want. You can cut that edge, I mean, you can use it a lot of different ways. And the difference between the two is just the size of the stitch, whether it's a big zigzag or a small zigzag. All right? Now on this one's a little different. The ovals have a scallop, and I did the scallop blade on the outside. So the reason I did the outside is because if you already had a card and you wanted to make it pretty, we just wanted to turn that into a scalloped edge, I can take that and position it, and it's going to cut that scallop for the card. So didn't mean I had to design them exactly the same way, right? Tell Sizzix that. It's okay to be different. They're like, well, don't you want them to, isn't that confusing? And I'm like, no. You only cut it once and realize it didn't work that way. It's not really confusing, right? You're like, oh, that didn't work the way I thought. Okay, that's how it works. I don't think that's confusing. I think it's good to have options. I think the more options we have for how we use stuff, the better it is. Sure. So there's going to be our scalloped edge. So our stitching, you can see, goes right along that scallop. Fun. Fun and simple.